I have some rapid fire playoff observations for you here. I went to Clippers and Mavericks last night in LA for game 5. I will get to that, but let's start with Boston closing out Miami. Other than the one game in game 2 where the Heat hit 23 of 43 threes, and in that game where, yeah, you can get mad at Boston defensively, or you could say they should have done this better. There's also some incredible shot making. I thought during the broadcast they were making it sound like no one was ever closing out on anybody. Caleb Martin had one in the corner. I was like, what? That went in. But this is basically what was supposed to happen because of the gap between who Boston has been statistically, even without Porzingis, and who the Heat are now with no Butler or Rozier for the entire series. I don't know if anyone's going to do a follow-up interview with Butler, who talked so much shit during the in-game interview, and then it all immediately went downhill from there. So Hero's the only offensive creator that's left in this one. They don't even have Jaquez for game 5 last night as it get closed out. And even with the Porzingis part of this being a question mark long-term about what Boston's going to be, they at least have someone in Cornet who could play, or the Tillman acquisition, which may play a big role in some specific matchup for them later on. But look, I'm not sure that Boston can win the whole thing against Denver, even with Porzingis healthy. I'm not sure they can win it against Minnesota or OKC without Porzingis, but I still think that Boston Celtics should win the East without him. And I'm not even sure who I'm picking, except I think I'm going to do it right now. I'm picking Minnesota over Denver in the second round. I don't love it, but I don't know. I could be in my head a little bit about this one, but I'm just going with it. So when you look at the rest of this Heat series with Boston, Derek White right there with Jaylen Brown, 22 points per game, despite being third in field goal attempts for the Celtics during this 5-game series. He shot 58 and 48% splits on 9 3-point attempts per game in this one. Hero, again, his game 2 is probably the best game I've ever seen him play. 7 of 13 from the floor, 24 points, 14 assists, incredible playmaking. The Heat just were dialed in on offense that night. And that game gave everyone, whether you're a Boston fan or somebody that's like, hey, there's just something weird with this Boston team. I don't like the way they closed, where I've had those moments as well. It's totally fair, accurate criticism. But it was more of like a Heat PTSD thing of last year, where it's like, yeah, that was actually the one out of the 5 games. And I almost never think anybody's going to sweep anybody because it's just human nature. But back on the Hero thing, his defense is atrocious. It is so bad. And whatever you are defensively, your limitations during the regular season, you can kind of be like, that guy's not, he doesn't play a ton of defense or whatever, but just at least stay in position and know what else is going on. This isn't even about being out of position or making selfish, risky gambles. He's just, the walls in Shogun are tougher than Hero as far as like providing some kind of resistance. And he gets stuck with Jaylen Brown as the primary matchup. He just gets hunted and hunted and hunted. And I used to think last year it was kind of unfair to be like, hey, is there some weird part of this Miami run to the finals where it's because Hero isn't out there and being exploited defensively? I used to think that was unfair. I still may think it's a little bit unfair, but he has to figure out a way to be passable and to provide some kind of resistance instead of picking fights with Peyton Pritchard 2 of the games. And as far as like this, we get a lot of Hero, and I know you can hear the annoyance in my voice, but it's just every now and then there'll be the sideline reporter that gives you this kind of like Hero legacy update of like, hey, how come I'm not mentioned with this? And there was thing years ago where it's like, oh, you guys talk about Trae Young, you talk about Luka, but like, look at what I've done. It's like, dude, I'm good on those for a little while. All right. And the Maxey debate this summer in pursuit of Lillard, when it was like, wait, could Philly make this move? And then there was pockets of Miami fans being like, Hero's better than Maxey. I think that conversation is over. We'll get to Maxey here as I close with Philadelphia. Milwaukee beating the Pacers in game 5 this week, keeping this series alive, down 3-1 going into it. They got 29, 12, and 5 from Middleton. He's now 27, 9, and 5 on the series. They don't have a choice but to run all their offense through him. And I think if this were to get weird and Milwaukee comes back, like the Middleton part of this is real. Like I thought he looked better to close. I just thought he was, he's kind of a bit of a reminder, like, man, this guy really can score without a lot around him. They had 76 points in the elimination game from Portis, Middleton, and Beasley. The Pacers defense, it's the second worst defense in the playoffs, ahead of only Phoenix, who was the worst, obviously. And with the Pacers D, even though I like kind of who their roster is and get Mathurin back healthy and maybe the development of one of the other younger guys. Like I watch them and go, there's a lot of the guys on this team that I kind of like here, but their defense will keep the opponent in the game all the time. And that's what you have to be hoping for here if you are the Bucks. Halliburton, as of now, questionable tonight with his back. It felt like it was coming back a little bit in games 3 and 4. Not so much last night. They had that big lead. Milwaukee went crazy. The building's electric, and they just smashed them. And maybe that's desperation of enough guys being on the Milwaukee team with a lot of pride that have been through some playoff battles before. But this is a really, really incredible moment in history. Look, no one's going to do a documentary on this series, but the point being that you have Doc who says about Giannis that he's, quote, very, very, very thin ice, close with that calf injury that he suffered on April 9th, where the initial report was 2 to 4 weeks from April 9th. That was not an official report from the team, but tonight puts Giannis at 3 weeks. So by the time you hear this, I mean, if Giannis is actually cleared and ready to go, and somehow Milwaukee comes back and wins this series, and the Pacers are thinking about being up 3-1, facing Middleton and the others, and not being able to close them out. It's a franchise that hasn't won a playoff series in 10 years, and Carlisle hasn't won a playoff series since the Mavericks beat the Heat in the finals in 2011. So could be a haunting moment there in Game 5. We'll see what happens tonight. So I went to the game last night in LA. Mavs blew out the Clippers. It was actually a game, and then there was a little bit of a cushion there from the Mavs at the end of the first half, but it still felt like a game. And then it was just on, and the Mavs ran away from this one. A very early white flag from Ty Lue and the Clippers. Not critical, just pointing out the timeline. So we got one of the other Harden games. After a miraculous Game 4 and hitting all those floaters, exploiting the coverage against the Mavericks, getting past the primary defender at will. I'm not going to go fucking nuts about this. He went 2 for 12. I think he now has the most games with 10 or more shots with less than 10 points, or thinking playoff history. I forget what the number was. I saw it last night. LA wanted to exploit the size advantage they have with Zubac, who's terrific. But I have to wonder if at some point to survive in this series and in last night's game that you're going to need Harden to take on the scoring mentality we saw with him closing in Game 4. It's something I think about. It would be a question for Ty Lue. It doesn't mean that because it didn't work out that what he did was wrong. But would you want to plant that differential seed in Harden to start a Game 5 where the series is tied? And that's how they were playing. They liked their matchup with it. It was working, by the way. But I wonder if, Harden shouldn't have to be reminded, be like, hey, we're going to need you to score a bunch tonight. But it's just a thought as I was watching it play out. I'm like, having him kind of be this playmaker for such a large chunk of the start of the game, does that plant the seed for him to do what he did in the second half, where he took one shot in the third quarter, and then he took 2 threes right around the 9-minute mark of the fourth quarter. Then he was subbed out at 7:25. So I could sit here and go, hey, the guy only took 3 shots in the second half. Well, they subbed him out with 7:32 to go. And that point, they were down 27 and the game was kind of over. But as I sat there, and it was something I was very tuned into of watching him, it's like, all right, so you're running this man Powell stuff on the other side. There was a stretch there where they felt like they needed it from Harden. With the games today, you're still kind of always in it. And Harden was on the other side. He wasn't even in the action. Paul George wasn't even in the game. And so you're just like, all right, so I'll leave it at that. Luka in person is kind of what you'd expect it to look like, where you're like, I guess he's just going to get to wherever he wants for the most part. And it just goes slower for him than it does for other players that have so much stress on their offensive game. Like, there'll just be this moment where it's like, okay, he's in the paint now, and he's kind of taking up his time, sizing the release point of what he wants to do on this. And you're just so afraid of every direction that he's going to go into with his size that it kind of freezes people around him. And that was an incredible contrast to Kyrie, who Maxey's speed right now is just destroying people. All right. Tyrese Maxey, I'll save it because it's all glowing. But his just raw speed gets him buckets that not many players can get. Kyrie's attack is like this amazing foreign sports car that has the tightest handling you've ever experienced in your life. And that's something that you can appreciate more with Kyrie live than, the times I've watched him on TV. And granted, I've watched him live a bunch of times, but it's just this build up, and then it's this footwork, and then it's this angle, and then he's turning on you. And it's just perfect, man. It's really, really cool to see this. Also in person, we got to see PJ Tucker come in and just hack the shit out of Luka's arms. And apparently there's PJ Tucker rules that I've not been forwarded. I can't believe the stuff PJ Tucker gets away with. I know he's not playing a ton, and something may have gone wrong if PJ Tucker's out there, but they threw him out there at Luka, and he was just, it looked like defensive lineman drills with it, without any calls. I sat in the second row behind Jimmy Goldstein. You may have seen me on television. I did pay for the ticket. The ticket was $2,000. The tickets in front of us were $9,000. I was invited by a friend. Yes, I went with a buddy to a game, something outside of my house. He said, "Do you want to go to the game?" I said, "Fine, no problem." He goes, "I'm buying the tickets." I was like, "Of course, you're not paying for mine. I'll kick in." He's like, "The one in front's are $9." I go, "I'm not doing that." And then there's those tickets to the end of the bench in the NBA experience where you're sort of on the bench, but then you're deep into the corner. And if you have a team that's, say, in a playoff game that's going up almost 30 points and they're all celebrating on the bench, you may never see a moment of the actual basketball game other than like the opening first few minutes. I don't know what you do with those seats. It's kind of an amazing experience because you're basically on the bench. You're one seat away from the last guy in the the Dallas Mavericks bench. Denver has the same seating, I believe, but you don't see anything. All right. So as I raved about Maxey's straight line speed, he's the second leading scorer in the playoffs here behind Brunson. Brunson's at 34. Maxey's at 32. Brunson's shooting splits are 42, 29%, 78% on 9 attempts from the free throw line. Maxey's at 40, 50, 88 on 5 attempts from the free throw line a game. So I don't know what the end game is here for Maxey, because the way he stresses your defense, the way you have to try to respect him, whether it's the 3 he hit to tie it up, the 4-point play is just an inexcusable play on that one defensively from Robinson. But he is doing things, and I am impressed by those things that he does. So we'll leave it at that. When I was watching Harden last night, and as I've watched Philly throughout this series, I know that there were some maybe in the asset management world that were raving about what Morey was able to do with the Harden trade in recovering the assets that he moved for him. This is the part about the trade that I didn't understand and why there wasn't really more paid attention to it. And I can't really be critical of Morey because the market for Harden, the trade market for him was going to be incredibly limited because most of the teams are like, one, I'm not interested. This is the 4th trade he's asked for. And if he's not happy here, like, what am I actually trading for? And where are we? So the Clippers spot was great for Harden because he said he was looking to get paid. Okay. He also was going to fit in with these guys a lot better. So it was kind of a perfect match. But the problem is I've watched Philadelphia throughout the series where they've been right in it, despite the ups and downs of it all, is that whatever you think of Harden in the playoffs, that's 30, 35 minutes of playoff minutes that are going to who? Batum's the only rotational piece that they got out of that. And for a team that each year feels like the window gets tougher and tougher with predicting the future of Embiid's health, you're like, yep, there wasn't really anyone to trade with. Yeah, they got the picks. They recouped some of that. And, Batum's actually extended his career far beyond what I thought he would be able to do. But that's a lot of minutes for you to not have anything back that helps you this year. But I don't know that Morey had a ton of options. But this isn't Morey. This isn't about Morey. It's more about the praise of what the transaction was. And maybe I'm being unfair knowing that the market was incredibly limited. We will close with the non-closer, Joel Embiid. What he avoided, the shitstorm of criticism that he avoided from Tyrese Maxey getting it done and winning game 5. I guess I can believe because I do this for a living, but the 48 hours that were waiting for Joel Embiid had the Sixers lost that game because he was awful. They're doubling them more. It's something I'll be looking for tonight. Sometimes it's the double on the catch. It was the double late in Game 4. They were doubling them a lot more in Game 5. The turnovers were atrocious. I think he actually should have had more, but some of the possessions were saved. He looked incredibly uncomfortable. At 3:08 in overtime, there was a wide open three for him off the defense going to the left. He didn't want to take it. He dribbled into the lane. He didn't want to take it. He passed it to Oubre. Oubre threw it up. Embiid got the offensive board. He was fouled. They challenged it. The call was upheld. It smelled a little bit like a Ben Simmons Atlanta moment. Not as terrible, but it was someone that looked incredibly uncomfortable in a huge, huge spot again. And Embiid either delayed what was waiting for him nationally and specifically locally in Philadelphia. But I don't know if Philly comes back, they win this series, if Embiid will have avoided what was waiting for him, that storm, or just delayed it.